But I want you to consider this. Alan McLaughlin spent the first 3 decades of her life as a biological man.
Okay, I'm considering
And
it.
it is important to understand that biological men have much greater bone density than biological women.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying Alana McLaughlin cheated. Just come out and say it. Just come out and say it, bro. You're saying that Alana McLaughlin cheated because her bones are stronger. What you don't know, by the way, we don't actually have any reason to believe that Alana McLaughlin's bones are stronger. That's just there's no reason to believe that. Actually, we have a lot of reasons to believe that's probably not the case. Okay, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is going to be something new for us to do. I have not done, I don't want that on the screen at all. That's not good. Need to remember not to do that. This is the first time I'm doing one of these, so y'all will have to be a little patient with me. I've never done one of these reaction sort of things, and I've definitely never done it on Twitch. I have on YouTube, actually, but this is going to be a new format, a new way for me to try to do this, so I'm very interested to see how it goes. We've chosen an interesting topic today. So today I was supposed to be interviewing Lady Bree, who is a former professional MMA fighter who is also transgender, and we were going to pick her brain about the issue of especially about trans women competing in MMA, but just, trans folk competing in sports, especially combat sports in general. But that conversation didn't happen due to technical issues, which is okay, nothing wrong with that. But it did give me the itch to talk about this subject. And I had tried to make a reaction video to Ramsey Dewey discussing this fight a couple of times back when it happened. Because back when it happened, it was when a lot of my friends were first finding out that I was transgender, and a lot of my friends came from the combat sports community. So it was something that I was very passionate about. It was something that all of my friends seemed to have really, really toxic opinions about, and they didn't seem to be aware of their toxicity. So I really wanted to address this issue. I think that there's a lot of points that are mentioned that aren't fair, that that seem reasonable on the surface but are not. And I think that there are a lot of things that go unsaid. And those things that go unsaid are effectively misinform people on this conversation. And Ramsey Dewey's arguments here he doesn't really make open arguments for why he believes transgender women shouldn't be competing in women's MMA, but that is the implication of everything that he says. And a lot of the things that he'll say during this video are common talking points in favor of that position. And without actually saying that, he'll make it very clear that that's what his position is at the end of this video. But just these talking points are extremely common. They are sort of mainstream opinions, I would say, within the combat sports community. At the very least, they were mainstream opinions when this fight happened. So what is this fight? This is a fight between Alan McLaughlin and Celine Provost, an MMA fight. Alan McLaughlin is transgender. Celine Provost is a cis woman. Celine Provost had been, if I understand correctly, had been a professional kickboxer for some time when this fight happened. And this was, I believe, Alan McLaughlin's first fight of any kind. I don't think that she had had any. I don't think that she had had any professional or amateur fights before this. So this was her first fight. And it was televised and all of that sort of thing. And Alana McLaughlin ended up winning, and of course a lot of folks said the reason that she won is simply because she is transgender, because she is a biological male, and that that gave her, an advantage over her cisgender opponent, and demonstrates why transgender women should not be fighting in MMA. I personally think this fight does not support that at all, and I think that as we go through it, we're going to see that, if anything, the way that the martial arts community and the MMA community respond to this fight says a lot more about them than it does about whether or not trans women should or should not be competing in MMA. So we'll go ahead and get started with this video. This is Ramsey Dewey. And by the way, real quick too, this isn't a cancel Ramsey Dewey kind of thing. I haven't watched Ramsey Dewey's channel since he made this video. This video kind of turned me off to him. But I respected him for a long time. I've learned a lot from him. I've watched and practiced a lot of his technique videos. I've learned a lot from a lot of his videos about training and like how to train and how to take care of your body and that sort of thing. I've gotten a lot of value out of this channel, and I'm not saying that I'm not saying that Ramsey Dewey is a bad guy. That's not what this is. But his opinions on this are abysmal and toxic and reflective rather, of the toxic discourse around this issue in the combat sports community. So if I dig into him a little bit here and call him out, you'll have to forgive me. Also, I can't claim to have he's talking from a place of experience, and I'm not. I've never been a fighter. Ramsey Dewey has definitely been a fighter. He was a professional fighter for a very long period in his life and has way more experience than practically any. I would say, I was about to say practically any other. That's not true. But he has way more experience than most professional fighters. He has had a lot of fights in a lot of different settings, and he's coached a lot of fighters as well. So I'm not trying to cast doubt on his experience. I am trying to cast doubt on whether or not it's his experience as a fighter that led him to these opinions. I think it's his biases that have led him to these opinions, and has led many in the combat sports community to their opinions. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's play the video. Ramsey Dewey, tell us what we need to know about this fight between Alan McLaughlin and Celine Provost.
Now, on with the show. Today we are discussing a controversial topic about a controversial fight with some controversial fighters. Specifically, transgender MMA fighter Alan McLaughlin.
What a great picture.
And her recent MMA fight against French fighter Celine Provost, a very tall, slender French woman.
Already we're talking about like body sizes and types. He showed rather a picture of Alan McLaughlin looking all buff as fuck, which she is, and then mentioned for some reason that Celine Provost is tall and slender, and much of this discussion is going to come down to differing body types. Of course, if we look at the panel of cis women fighters, we will see a variety of body types in there. We will see women who are just as strong as Alan McLaughlin. Let me ask you this, Mr. Dewey. If Alan McLaughlin and Amanda Nunes got in a fight, who do you think would win? Who do you think is stronger? I mean, I don't know, but neither do you, and it demonstrates my point.
So what happened, and why are people up
I don't know who's stronger. I know who would win that fight. Amanda Nunes would win that fight.
in arms? Why are people rehashing all the same things they said when Fallon Fox was fighting? Because they are. And one of those things that they keep repeating, which...
Another thing to point out here is the sort of images that Ramsey will put up on the screen. They're meant to evoke an emotional reaction. When Fallon Fox was fighting, and even to this day, they tried to draw parallels between her engaging in consensual sport combat. They tried to draw parallels from that to domestic abuse. And so when you see this picture like he showed, which is shown all the time when discussing Fallon Fox, of her opponent on the ground protecting her face as Fallon Fox is on top of her, hitting her, as you do in an MMA fight, that imagery is chosen on purpose to paint a certain picture and to evoke certain emotional reactions. Did Ramsey Dewey use that picture on purpose to evoke that emotional reaction? I don't know, but a lot of people have. Maybe he just reused that because it was an easy image to find and put in his video, but it has the same effect. So I don't know if he's doing this because he wants to project that image or if it was done carelessly, but it's wrong either way to use those images in this context. given how they've been used.
Which is just patently stupid. And that's without the bulk of what I'm going to talk about here. I'm not going to reiterate and rehash all the stupid talking points you keep hearing over and over and over again.
He actually is,
on
though.
This topic. No. We're going to squash
alert.
this idea. And that is this one. And I've even heard this come from people that I respect. And that is, transgender athletes should have their own division.
I think
That
there
is
should be
a
a
stupid
category
idea.
for
I agree.
Alana and other individuals who are
And this isn't going to make
transitioning
up the
from
bulk
male
of the
to
video.
female
This is
who,
going to be a brief discussion.
fight each
and
other.
then it'll
Like, to
get
me, that
to
makes
the
the most
details
logical sense.
of transgender
There should be a
women fighting in
transgender
MMA.
division. Okay,
But
well,
I
that
agree
would
with Ramsey
solve
Dewey here.
a lot
There
of
is no
problems
point to the
if there were
transgender
actually
division.
transgender fighters to
He'll
fill
get
a
into it.
division, but there aren't. Do you know how many transgender athletes there are out there competing?
He names 3 in this. I can think of 4. There is not that many. A transgender division in MMA would not work. A transgender division in any combat sport probably wouldn't work. I can't think of a single one. Maybe HEMA, maybe fencing. There's probably a lot of trans folks in those.
Competing in the sport of mixed martial arts? Not very many. Do you know how many transgender athletes? How many can you name in the sport of mixed martial arts? Well, there's Alana, who just fought. There's Fallon Fox, who's retired, and there is a Mexican.
Both of whom are incredibly brave women for doing what they were doing, especially Fallon Fox. Fallon Fox was the first transgender professional MMA fighter in history, I believe, and she faced incredible hate, insane amounts of hate, just absolutely just the most awful shit. One of the grossest things I've ever seen is transphobes will take recordings of Alan McLaughlin in like interviews and stuff like that, and they'll tune down her voice to make her sound more masculine so that it feels more like a dude talking. Fucking disgusting.
Mexican MMA fighter who is transgender who fought once, like 8 years ago, something like that. And that's about it.
The only one that he's missing that I know of is Lady Bree, who continued to fight for a little while after coming out as transgender. And apart from them, I agree with him. I don't know of any others either. I think there's only the 4. I wouldn't be surprised if trans folks have competed in like some smaller combat sports that don't have as much like televised presence and stuff. Like I wouldn't be surprised if there have been some transgender Muay Thai fighters as an example. But I literally just know of those 4 transgender MMA fighters, and I'm always looking around trying to find more.
You cannot fill a division with 2 retired fighters and 1 current active fighter. That's not a division. MMA fighters are already outliers in society. Female MMA fighters are much, much greater outliers. They're outliers within the sport of MMA. Transgender male to female athletes in the sport of mixed martial arts are so marginal out there. They are such outliers, you might as well be looking for a unicorn in a patch of 4-leaf clover or whatever else you can relate to being super rare. They're just...
Why are people always calling us unicorns? I don't get it. Is unicorn like a thing? Are they like do they want something from us? I don't... Interesting phrasing, Ramsey. Interesting phrasing.
Just aren't that many of them. And there are definitely not enough to fill the division. As far as women's MMA in general, most MMA promotions don't have enough women to fill up the women's divisions.
That's true. Though, when he's bringing this up to try to say that there can't be a trans women's division because there's barely enough women to be a women's division. But it doesn't seem like he's really stopping to think why there's so few women in the combat sports world. Because women love competing in sports. Women love competing in rough and tumble sports. One of the most popular amateur sports among women in the world is roller derby, which is a tough sport about riding around, going really fast on with wheels attached to your feet and knocking people around. Yeah, I can tell you the reason why there's not very many women fighters. It's because most of the gyms that you got to come up in to be a fighter aren't the best. The best, I don't know, aren't the safest spaces for women in general. Obviously, there's lots of women that power through that and get in, and they're tough and they're able to make it. And there's also lots of women that fit in just perfectly well at those gyms and don't have any problems. But yeah, it's a tough environment for women oftentimes.
I've coached a lot of female athletes over the years, and the biggest complaint they have, the biggest complaint they bring to me is, I can't find an opponent. I can't find an opponent in my weight class. I can't find an opponent in my
Hello,
geographic
Marcy. How are
locale.
you?
I had one female.
We're discussing, as you can see, we are discussing the issue of transgender women fighting in MMA. We are responding to Ramsey Dewey's video from a year ago about the Alan McLaughlin Celine Provost fight because he sort of he uses a lot of really common talking points, and I think his views are sort of representative overall of how the combat sports community feels about the issue. Unfortunately, I should move the chat box. Cool. And I'm interested to hear your opinion, so feel free to chime in.
Athlete who told me I would be willing to fight men just to get a fight. Because on the rare occasion.
So let's think about the implications of what he's saying. He's saying there's hardly enough women for women to get a fight in the first place, competing in the sport of MMA. And a lot of women will come to him saying that they would be willing to fight men if it meant they would get a fight. And like I know I have seen that. I have seen women who want to fight saying, "Hey, look, I'll fight men if I have to. I don't care." It can be very, very hard for especially amateur women fighters to get a fight. That's a real thing. But he's making that connection to say that that's the reason why Celine Provost fought Alana McLaughlin. He's saying that Celine was willing to fight a man, and that's the reason why she accepted the fight. Well, Alana McLaughlin is not a man. Alana McLaughlin is a woman. So that argument doesn't really hold water. But just notice the implication. He's just inherently implying that Alana McLaughlin is not a woman, that she's a man, and that will lie at the heart of all of his arguments. I personally don't want to compete BJJ or even sport karate sparring as a male, but I'll have to for the experience. I'd love to get a BJJ super fight set up with me and another MTF trans grappler. Yeah, I mean, that sounds cool. It's good luck. It's going to be tough to find that, and I'm sorry to say that. I guess maybe if you live in a big city, it might be easier. I wouldn't, yeah, maybe, I don't know why I'm saying that. I live in a small town conservative area. And so that colors my my view of those things. But actually, maybe if you lived in a big city, you probably could. You might be able to get that set up. In terms of having to for the experience, I mean, you don't have to compete. That's not a requirement. You definitely don't have to do that. I personally would find it very degrading to compete in a men's division and wouldn't want to do that. If you want to, that's totally cool. But I definitely would not say that you have to compete, because you really don't. And especially if people are going to make you compete in a division that's designed for that's supposed to be exclusionary to your gender, that's not something you need to subject yourself to unless you really want to. But if you do really want to, go for it.
Where I do get a fight, I either have to cut down like 3 weight classes or I have to fight up 3 weight classes, because there are just not enough women to fill a single weight class. And that's a problem.
And he does not address why that problem exists in the rest of the video, in case you were wondering.
That's one of the problems with this fight in general. If you look at Celine Provost, she's at least 6 feet tall, maybe a little bit over. And she suffered from
tall girl.
The same problem I had when I was cutting down to 145 pounds as a professional fighter. I fought in 4 different weight classes, and I fought once in the sport of MMA as a featherweight, 145 pounds, and once in the sport of kickboxing as a featherweight, 145 pounds, and all my other fights were in the heavier weight classes. And to get down to 145 pounds, I almost had to kill myself.
Yeah, and this is true, and this is going to actually undermine his argument in a minute. My question is, are there any BJJ tournament promotions that would let me compete in the female bracket with blood work tests? I've heard that there are. I don't know who they are. I don't know the details, but I've heard that that some of them do. I've also heard that even among organizations that say they do that, that the actual implementation of that at the local level is inconsistent. But I don't know. I haven't tried to compete as it after coming out, so I really can't tell you.
It was excruciating, it was awful, it affected my performance in horrible ways, it made me slow, it made me unresponsive, it just killed my nervous system.
So later on, he's essentially going to argue that Alan McLaughlin has all of these physical advantages just due to the fact that she's transgender. And right now he's giving all these reasons why Celine Provost wouldn't be at her best and why she would be having physical disadvantages coming into this fight.
It sucked, and I recognize a lot of those same movement patterns from Celine Provost in this fight. I can tell she is cutting down. I can tell she's suffering from the same problem that a lot of the female athletes that I've coached had. They have a very difficult time finding opponents, and so they're willing to take whatever they are offered.
Exactly. Celine Provost took a fight where she had to cut a whole bunch of weight. Obviously, she was going to be at a physical disadvantage in that fight. It's so obvious. So how can you claim that there's some sort of just like objective fact that proponents of trans people competing in MMA are ignoring that would suggest that obviously the only reason that McLaughlin won is because McLaughlin had a physical advantage? It's the opposite. At least in terms of things that like we know about or that we have really good reasons to think. We have really good reasons to think that Celine Provost had to cut a bunch of fucking weight to get in this fight. And that just decimates your athletic performance, as Ramsey Dewey is admitting. Later on, he will claim that he won't claim, but he will heavily imply that the reason that Alan McLaughlin won the fight was simply because of physical advantages. So
that's the thing with fighters. Most fighters, you can offer them the most mismatched, horrible fight, the most lose-lose scenario possible, and they will take it. You can say, hey, here's a fight offer for you. I know it's your very first amateur fight, but you're going up against a guy 7 weight classes above you. He has killed his last 17 opponents in the ring. He's a 17th degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt world champion 15 times over. And that fighter will still say, yes, I will take the fight.
That's not strictly speaking true. But again, Celine Provost wanted this fight. In an interview, she said that she had no problem taking a fight against a transgender woman. She agreed to this. It's so strange. So Ramsey Dewey is saying that he believes Celine Provost took the fight out of desperation and would not have taken that fight otherwise. He's basing that on the fact that women often have a hard time finding opponents. But Celine Provost didn't say that. Alana McLaughlin didn't say that. Neither of their camps said that. Just nobody said that. There's literally zero reason to believe that Celine Provost would not have taken this fight if she had another option. That Celine Provost would not have fought a transgender athlete if there were other options available. The only people saying that are commentators like Ramsey Dewey and others talking about the fight. Mostly men and definitely 100% people who didn't take into the fight. 100% of the people who participated in that fight said that they wanted to have that fight. The only people saying that they didn't want to have that fight were not involved in the fight. It's really that simple.
Simply on principle. Somebody asked me a while ago, Ramsey, how do I develop toughness for Muay Thai? Like, man, when you got...
It is true that it's rare and it's kind of like culturally taboo, not culturally taboo. There's a lot of reasons why you don't want to turn down a fight if you're offered it. But it isn't true that just no one ever turns down a fight. That happens all the time. And people back out of fights too that they've agreed to. Like this idea that every single fighter takes every single fight all the time and always follows through. That's simply not true. That's not true at the highest levels. That's not true in the UFC. And that's definitely not true at the level that we're talking about here.
A punch, doesn't that hurt? Well, yeah, it does. But you just make up your mind, I'm going to fight, and that's how it is, and if I get hit, I'm just going to keep going. If the lights are still on, I'm going to keep going. That's a fighter's mentality.
It's a lot of fighters' mentality.
If the Incredible Hulk stands in front of you, and you know for a fact he's going to murder you, you just keep going, because that's what fighters do. If you were offered the most mismatched, lopsided fight, where death is inevitable, a fighter just says, yes, I'll take that fight. If the ring doctor comes up to you mid-fight and you're bleeding to death and says, look, if the other fighter so much as breathes on you, you are going to die in the next round. Do you want to continue? That fighter is going to say, yes, sir, I do. Because that's what fighters do. Fighters...
Actually, sometimes in between rounds, fighters say they don't want to keep fighting. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. But I mean, like, largely the point that he's trying to make is legit, that there's a culture of just completing the fight no matter what. It's probably not a good thing. Here's a good example. Militich. What's his name? Pat Militich? Am I getting that right? I get names wrong. Let me make sure. Yeah, Pat Militich. Pat Militich said in an interview, I don't know if it's true or not, it doesn't really matter. What he said in an interview is that when he used to fight, when he would agree to take a fight, on that day he would put a loaded gun in his dresser, and he would tell himself that if he doesn't make weight, that he either makes weight or he swallows the bullet in that gun, something like that. What the fuck is wrong with you, bro? And like, that Pat Militich is extremely influential on the culture of combat sports. He's like sort of one of the bedrocks of it, to be honest, from back in the day. And it just horrifies me that this man taught others how to perceive of themselves and conceive of fighting. Like, what the fuck? What the hell, dude? So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of truth to what Ramsey Dewey is saying here. Not sure if it's a great thing, but I'm not a fighter, so what do I know?
Fight. And I could see that from Celine Provost. I could see from start to finish, she's a fighter. She has that heart. Bless her for it. For good or for bad.
What do you mean for bad?
She's willing to take what's put in front of her. So let's talk about the fight itself. So what happened? Our transgender athlete, Alan McLaughlin, she was a former...
Our transgender athletes. Those transgenders. So exasperating.
Army Special Forces...
So, like, I want to be charitable, but, like, this is just a cruel and disgusting thing. It's so gross. And it undermines his point. Because look how much smaller she is now. Look how much her body has changed. She does not look like the same person at all. The only reason we know this is the same person is because people keep plastering this picture all over the internet to tell us it's the same person. Otherwise, we would have no fucking idea. We would have no clue. We just would have thought they had the same tattoos or some shit. It's gross.
This is operative. That probably sounds like it's a big deal, right? I suppose in many ways it is, but it makes us think, oh, they must be really good at fighting. Well, newsflash. The Army specializes in using weapons and unit tactics to wage warfare as opposed to hand-to-hand combat. Yes, modern militaries do spend some time training in hand-to-hand combat, but combatives are not the major emphasis of modern warfare. Surprise! In fact, hand-to-hand combat has never been the major emphasis of warfare, modern or ancient. Weapons have always given people a huge advantage, even a guy with a long, pointy stick.
You know what involves weapons? MMA. You know what they do when you have an MMA fight? And yeah, so here's what they do. They wrap this stuff around your wrists that make it so that your fist stays in place, and it's like a hard thing that you can just punch with super hard. And then they put gloves over your vulnerable joints in your hand so that when you hit with this, you're able to hit way harder than you ever would be if you didn't have those gloves on, and you're able to inflict way more damage than you ever would if your wrists weren't all wrapped up, if your hands weren't wrapped, or whatever, however you put it. So yeah, those gloves aren't to protect anybody, and neither are those hand wraps. Those are weapons. MMA, the sport of MMA already involves weapons. It involves modifying the way that a part of the human body works so that it will inflict more damage than it would otherwise.
Actually, especially the guy with a long pointy stick has a huge advantage over the most well-trained hand-to-hand combatant in the world. Hence the use of long pointy sticks throughout history. So, I was not particularly surprised when Alana kind of got lit up a bit in the first round. And her strategy was to come right down the center line like a 2D fighting game, like old school Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, against an opponent who was a fairly decent counterpuncher. Now, I watched a couple of...
So, like, obviously Ramsey Dewey knows a lot more about fighting than I do, but, like, this part of it is 100% true. So, it appears to me that Celine Provost is a skilled striker, and yeah, Alan McLaughlin was not on her striking game that day, and she almost lost the fight because of this. Because of it, she was losing the fight almost the entire time, as we will see. Celine Provost was beating the fuck out of Alan McLaughlin most of the time.
Celine Provost, you know, the tall 6-foot ladies, previous fights, she had at least one amateur MMA fight and at least one professional MMA fight, and she was finished in the first round via submission by her previous opponents. Now, I couldn't find any boxing or kickboxing matches, but I got the feeling that was her preferred sport. And this happens a lot. A lot of times women want to compete in boxing, but then they get offered a kickboxing match or an MMA fight, and there's no one else to fight, so they do it. Or vice versa. They're just a boxer, but they get roped into an MMA fight or a Muay Thai fight. And if they want to compete, which they do, they have to take it because there are no alternatives. Because the divisions are so small.
Sometimes YouTubers take boxing fights too. It's crazy.
Because again, female athletes are already outliers in a sport which is already an outlier in the world of sports. And once again, the transgenders are outliers amongst the outliers amongst the outliers.
Those transgenders are always outlying. So, I don't know about y'all, but when it's dark out, I'm always out there lying, just outlying all the time. That's what we do. We're outliers.
So, Alana opens up this fight with a leg kick, does not step off the center line, stays on the center line, pays for it with a right hand counter. This happens a couple of times. And
the reason I know that Alan McLaughlin wasn't on her game is because, like, that sounds like the kind of shit I would do. I'm so bad at striking. The concept of striking off the center line has not sunk in for me yet. And I've had a lot of time for it to sink in. I just think maybe it's just not going to sink in at this point.
And she gets lit up a bit in the first round. Second round, Alana changes up her game plan, moves in, gets a body lock, muscles her opponent down to the floor for a takedown, and
muscles her opponent down. If this was not a transgender person fighting a cisgender person, there's no way he would have said that. Maybe he would have, probably not. He would have just said, she got the takedown, because that's what happened. I don't care how strong Alan McLaughlin is. That takedown could have been defended against. The only reason McLaughlin got the takedown here is because Celine Provost did not have adequate takedown defense to defend herself there, or she did. It just wasn't firing for her, which could have been the case. But yeah, muscled your opponent down. Every takedown involves some form of muscle. Every single, they say technique is king, or I suppose we should say technique is queen, and I suppose that's true, but technique is just simply the way in which you apply the force generated by your muscles in order to get a certain desired action. A certain amount of strength is required for every single technique. That's especially true when it comes to techniques for taking people down when both people are standing, and especially true when we see the sort of takedown that McLaughlin did. It was just a successful takedown. Choosing to call it being muscled down is not a fair way to put it, because that's not how you would put it if this wasn't a transgender fighter.
And finishes the fight with a rear naked choke after out-grappling her opponent.
Which is exactly what anybody would expect, by the way. If one fighter has a whole bunch of grappling experience and they almost lose the first round of striking, their coach is going to say, "Hey, take that fighter down, get her to the ground and choke her." That's so obvious. That's just like the standard, the textbook response. And obviously that's what she did, and she won because she had grappling skills, and Celine Provost either didn't or wasn't displaying them that day. It's really, really that simple. If you get into a grappling fight and you can't grapple, you're going to lose. It has nothing to do with the fact that Alan McLaughlin was transgender. It just had to do with the fact that she knew how to grapple that day, and Provost didn't.
What really stood out in my mind, and I rewatched this several times to make sure I was seeing it correctly, after Ms. Provost was choked out, she started spilling blood out of her mouth. A large pool of blood was under her. The camera panned away, but then they showed a close-up in the slow-mo replay where the blood was just spilling out of her mouth, and then the doctor came and was wiping blood from her mouth. And this stood out to me because fighters hemorrhaging from the mouth is not really a common thing.
It's not a common thing, but it does happen, and there's multiple reasons why it might happen, which is important to remember going forward. You'll see why in a minute.
I've seen it. I've experienced it personally, and when it happens, it is because of one thing, and that is broken sinuses.
You are a liar, Ramsey Dewey. Like I said, I respect Ramsey Dewey, but in this case, I cannot believe that I can't say anything other than that he is lying here, because there's no way that he has the amount of experience fighting that he says he has, and the amount of experience coaching fighters that he says he has, and I believe him. I believe he does have that experience. There's no way that he has that amount of experience and hasn't seen blood coming out of a fighter's mouth for reasons other than broken sinuses. There's lots of reasons why blood will come out of a fighter's mouth. It happens literally all the time. It happens when the inside of your mouth gets cut up. It can happen because of like burst blood vessels outside of your sinuses. There's just so many reasons why. It's true that it's not common, but there's way more than one reason. And there is zero reason to believe that it was because of broken sinuses. In post-fight interviews, Provost didn't say anything about that. I think she did. So Celine Provost did address the reason why blood came out of her mouth after the fight. And it wasn't because of broken sinuses. I do remember that. I want to say what she said happened. I might be remembering this wrong, and I tried to verify this before I got on here. I actually asked some folks. Let me look again real quick to see if I got a response. No, that's okay. Anyway, she said it was not because of broken sinuses. If I'm remembering right, what she said was that something had caused her to like swallow a bunch of blood, and then when the fight was over and she was done being choked and all that stuff, she started regurgitating it, something like that. I might be remembering wrong, but it wasn't because of broken sinuses. And saying that it happens because of one thing is just factually incorrect, and Ramsey Dewey has to know that. He has to, with the amount of experience that he has.
In the school. When you have broken sinuses in
And
the skull,
refereeing
whether they're the
countless
frontal
fights,
sinuses,
too.
the nasal sinuses, the sinuses here, etc., blood leaks down through the throat into the stomach, and then that is regurgitated and it comes out of the mouth. A lot of it comes out of the mouth. And that's what I was seeing. So we were dealing with some skull fractures right there. How big, I don't.
We don't know that. There's literally no reason to believe that we were dealing with skull fractures. Let's see if we can find it. If Celine Provost's skull was fractured, first of all, that's something that happens in fights. But if it did happen, they would have reported it afterwards. Let's take a look. Celine Provost skull fracture. I can't find any news articles saying that. I can see like Christian Post and like conservative outlets making that claim. I can't find any actual like news outlets or like sports outlets or anything saying that. Click news. I can see a lot of opinion pieces saying they think that's what happened. But that Brent suffered a concussion. That's not Provost though. Yeah, let me look at this article from September of last year. They don't quote Provost in this article, but that's okay. Yeah, there's nothing about Celine Provost's skull being broken or any sort of fractures, skull fractures occurring in this fight. So there just isn't like that simply did not happen, and yet he's saying it happened without having any reason to believe that to paint a certain narrative, and it's really fucking gross. It's the same thing that they said about Fallon Fox, by the way, if you remember that. They pointed to the fact that one of her opponents had an orbital fracture, which is something that happens all the time in MMA. And then they tied that back to the narrative that transgender women fighting in MMA is akin to like domestic abuse. And Ramsey Dewey's playing into that here by basically claiming that this was due to bleeding sinuses due to skull fractures, which did not happen. There's no evidence that it happened. The only people who are saying that it happened are commentators on the internet like Ramsey Dewey.
Oh no, I didn't see any depressions.
Welcome
I personally
back,
have
Marcy.
a large depressed skull fracture right here, and a hairline fracture all the way up there, and some bone fragments pushed into my eye, etc., that caused some partial blindness, etc., etc. How did that happen to me? That
Ramsey
happened
Dewey
because
has
my
been
opponent
through it,
loaded
man.
his wraps, and one single punch smashed my skull in some irreparable ways. Now that was illegal, of course. But fighters are willing to do illegal things. It happens all the time.
How is that
Why?
relevant
Because
to
there's
this
money
fight?
on the line and they want to win it. Because what do they get if they get caught? Shame, shame. We're going to disallow
largely
you from
true,
competing for a
unfortunately,
certain amount of time.
Especially internationally.
Boo. That's what fighters get if they're caught cheating. But if they win a lot of money. And in the case of that fight, the winner was going to win 1 million RMB, renminbi, that's Chinese currency, which is equivalent to several $100,000 US. So it was kind of a big
paycheck.
deal. Now, am I accusing... what was her name?
remember her
Miss
name, huh?
McLaughlin of cheating? No.
Kind of sounds like you are, though. Why are you bringing it up? Why are you bringing up cheating at all? How is cheating relevant to this fight? Did somebody allege cheating? Why are we talking about this?
But I want you to consider this. Alan McLaughlin spent the first 3 decades of her life as a biological man.
Okay, I'm considering
And
it.
it is important to understand that biological men have much greater bone density than biological women.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying Alan McLaughlin cheated. Just come out and say it. Just come out and say it, bro. You're saying that Alan McLaughlin cheated because her bones are stronger. What you don't know, by the way, we don't actually have any reason to believe that Alan McLaughlin's bones are stronger. There's no reason to believe that. Actually, we have a lot of reasons to believe that's probably not the case. Did you know that there is a great degree of variety in the bone density of cis women? It's true. It's also true about cis men. Did you know that when we compare the bones of transgender people to the bones of cis men, that our bones are typically not as strong? They are more like the bones of cis women. Did you know that, Ramsey Dewey? You may know that, you might not. But you are making firm statements that somehow you know that Alan McLaughlin's bones are denser than Celine Provost's bones. How do you know the bone density of either fighter, sir? I don't think that you do. You don't know that. Nobody knows that. That's just absolutely silly. We have exactly one objective measurement that was used in this fight to determine whether or not Alan McLaughlin should be competing in the women's division. They did a hormone test on her. They determined that her hormone levels were on par or lower than most cis women. By the way, when they do these tests on cis women prior to fighting, oftentimes they fail. Oftentimes they come out with a testosterone level that is too high, and they sometimes aren't even allowed to compete. Cis women aren't allowed to compete in the women's division because of their testosterone levels. And yet, Alan McLaughlin was allowed to compete when her hormone levels were tested. And she was probably required, I don't know this for sure, but in most cases, she would have been required to have been on HRT for a certain period of time before they would have allowed her to fight. I assume that's also what happened here. So yeah, basically the argument is that Alan McLaughlin cheated because of her bones, and these jokers on the internet who comment about this fight, they purport to know that Alan McLaughlin's bone density is better than Celine Provost, which is just an absolutely absurd thing to believe.
Even after transitioning, even after hormone replacement therapy, etc., etc.
Literally not true.
And
all the studies suggest otherwise. So I just looked at a meta review of the data today, and there have been I found one study that kind of supports what he's saying, sort of. So I found one study that showed that, at least in the small sample size they used for that study, that the trans women had increased bone density 2 years into hormone replacement therapy, but then from there it went below where it was before they started hormone replacement therapy. And all these other studies that have just compared transgender women to cisgender men have shown significantly decreased bone density in trans women. Oddly enough, too, it's shown that they've had significantly less bone density both before and after transition. So, this argument just does not hold water at all.
I think this is a fair and important point to talk about. The overwhelming majority of the strikes that landed in that fight landed to the face of Alan McLaughlin, the transgender fighter. She got lit up pretty badly in the first round. She landed a couple of strikes on the ground in the second round. Not a lot of strikes. She had a couple of good knees. As far as I could tell, those didn't do a significant amount of damage.
Didn't have a whole
but she
lot
landed
to do with
several direct strikes to the head on the ground.
And I'm not saying those punches on the ground didn't do damage. I'm sure they did a lot of damage. But those aren't what won the fight. What won the fight was the choke.
Before she sunk in the choke. And then that giant pool of blood spilled out of the mouth. So I rewatched this fight several times, trying to see which one of these strikes would break the sinuses. Which one of these would release that type of blood.
None of them broke the sinuses, by the way.
Because what we have here is a case of somebody with much greater bone density smashing up the skull of somebody with a much lower bone density. Where else have we seen this? Well, how about Fallon Fox's first MMA fight where she broke the skull of her opponent? We don't often see skull fractures in female fights.
It is true that we see it less.
We do, however, see skull fractures fairly often when men fight women. Or
Yo. So here's another thing tying it to the domestic abuse. Look at this title card up on screen. Skull fractures of female domestic abuse survivors. So he's talking about the women that Fallon Fox fought against. And he's saying that what Fallon Fox did to them is this. It is what happens to female domestic abuse survivors. What a guy.
When transgender, male to female athletes fight women. Are we going to get canceled for saying this? Maybe. I don't know, but I think it's important to bring up.
Oh, so brave.
Why did my skull get broken? My opponent used kinesio tape, also known as Titan tape or rock tape. It's that stretchy adhesive that you use as like a mobile cast when you can't wrap up a certain part completely, and so you stretch that tape over it. A lot of physical therapists will use it to treat injuries on athletes, to help them move around. Now, if you wrap your hands with that stuff, it basically turns your hand into a rock. It binds the 28 small bones of the hand, like these little marble-sized hands of the bones and fingers, into a rock. Imagine a sack of marbles, 28 little marbles in a hand-sized bag.
Pretty
you throw
scary.
that at somebody's head, okay, that's going to hurt. It's not going to break their skull. You wrap that
I don't know,
up
I'd be
with
scared. Don't throw
kinesio
marbles
tape
at me, guys.
really tight, and then throw it. Now it's a rock. Now that has the potential to break
Don't
somebody's
throw
skull.
baseballs at me either.
Why? Because it's harder and it's denser.
I'm scared of
Harder and
baseballs.
denser bones are much, much more dangerous in a fight.
Okay, well,
And
I'm not going to comment on this. Let's
there
go.
were a few moments that were pretty telling. A few moments in this fight that stood out for me when Alana landed the few strikes that she did. The reaction from Celine Provost, it was a very adverse reaction. She had this look like she
Like
had
she
never
got hit in the back of the head? Is that the kind of look that she had?
been hit like that before.
Because that's what
Like she
happened. Let's go back. She'd never been hit like that before. Or she was trying to point out an illegal strike.
It was a
Let's
very
take look.
adverse reaction. She had this look like
Bam, right in the back of the head.
like
Looking
she
away,
had
got
never
hit in the
been
back
hit
of the
like
head.
that before.
Looks at the
Like she
referee,
just
hey,
got
I
hit with
hit
a
in the back
rock.
of the head.
It surprised her. There was a moment she looked at the referee and kind of waved it off like, I'm okay, I can continue.
So the other thing is, like, I don't know what the conversation was in the cage, and neither does Ramsey Dewey. So I guess I don't know that that's what was going on, but that's what it looks like. We don't know what was being said. Ramsey Dewey is making an argument based on what is being said, but he doesn't know what's being said. But if we look at what happened, what we can actually see, we saw her get hit in the back of the head, grab her the back of her head, and look at the ref. So I would say that the circumstantial evidence supports that what was happening is she was trying to point out, hey, this bitch is hitting me in the back of the head. Not that she was just like, so devastated by that punch. I'm sure it was a rough punch. I'm sure she didn't like getting hit that time, obviously. but Celine Provost is a tough bitch, and I don't know. That's my read of the situation, and that's based on what actually happened. Whereas Dave Ramsey's read on the situation is based on assumptions about what people are saying that he can't hear.
And there was such a massive striking disparity as far as number of strikes landed versus the damage the strikes were doing.
You don't know that. We can't know
And it was
how
clear
much
that
damage
Alana's
a strike is
few
doing
strikes that
without
she did
being the
land
person who's being struck.
We're doing a lot more damage than the many strikes.
First time I saw my my striking coach fight, he looked like, I mean, he was winning. He was winning 2 rounds. He was fucking shit up, and he looked great those entire rounds. Then he went to his corner in between the second and third round, and the third round he looked drunk. He looked like he could barely stand up. He somehow won the fight. I don't know how the fuck he pulled that off, but he was like stumbling around. He couldn't really protect himself the way he normally would, and it was because of a concussion that he had received, or if I understand right, it was because of a concussion or some strike to the head that he had received in either the first or second round, and then it caught up with him in the third round. So that's a thing that happens. You just simply can't tell how much damage a strike is doing. You can guess, you can make an educated guess, but you can't know unless you're the person getting hit.
That Celine was landing. So what are we going to do about this?
What are we
We
going to do
can't
about
have a
it?
transgender division. We just
What are we going
can't.
to do about what? What exactly is the problem here? What are we going to do about the fact that two women consensually had a fight and one of them won? What are we going to do about the fact that none of them walked away with any serious injuries? What are we going to do about the fact, here, how about this? What are we going to do about the fact that this fight doesn't fit your narrative at all? This fight actually supports our narrative and that it is fair for trans women to fight in sports. What are we going to do about that, Dave?
The fighters aren't there. They just don't exist.
They do,
And
there's a few of them.
if we say, hey,
One of them is Alan McLaughlin, who also can't get a fight now. If I am recalling correctly, she had been looking for a fight for a while since this one and has not been able to find one.
transgender athletes, you can't fight women anymore. People are going to throw their arms up, and
Let's do it. Everyone throw
a
their
lot of
arms up
people
with
are
me.
going to be unhappy about that.
Let's be unhappy.
And if you make any other regulation, if you step in there and try to arbitrate this mess, you're going to make at least half of the people unhappy. And that's the problem with being a referee. I speak from personal experience working as a referee in the sport of MMA. 50% of the people involved in every fighting event hate the referee's guts. At least 50% of the people hate you. And you will not make them happy. You just can't. When you're trying to do the right thing, when you're trying to be just, and when you're trying to be fair, and you're trying to act in the best interest of the fighters. Because at the end of the day,
Here
what
it
does a
comes,
referee
guys.
do?
You ready for it?
Their job is to look out for the safety of the fighters. If one fighter can no longer intelligently defend themselves, it is the referee's job to stop the action. So, friends, what's your solution?
So there's his solution. His solution as a referee is to stop the action because, in his opinion, one of the people in the fight cannot intelligently defend themselves against the other person. But the only reason why that person can't intelligently defend themselves in the fight is because they're a cis woman and their opponent is not. So there's his solution. We know his solution now. As a referee, as somebody who is concerned with the safety of the fighters, is to stop the action, stop trans women from being able to fight. I think that's the clear message of this video. And that's just the general consensus I would say, among a very large and vocal segment of the combat sports community. I'm not a fighter, like I said. I do not have the makings of an MMA fighter in any way whatsoever. So I am commenting on a sport that I have no experience in. But you don't have to be an expert in the sport of MMA to see that these arguments don't hold water. Maybe one day there will be research that suggests that trans women shouldn't be competing in the sport of MMA in the women's division, but it hasn't happened yet. So far, all the data suggests otherwise. This fight suggests otherwise. Your arguments fail. It's embarrassing. You're comparing trans women to domestic abusers. You're pulling up pictures of domestic assault survivors' skull fractures and comparing that to what Alan McLaughlin did in a cage in a sanctioned fight. It's disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself, Ramsey Dewey. And if you harbor these opinions, I encourage you to really think them through. Think about what we've talked about in this video and to do your own investigation and try to leave your biases at the door when you do it. I love you guys. This has not been a super fun conversation, but it's been an important one. I'm glad that we were able to have it together. And yeah, that's really all that I have to say. I love you guys. Goodbye.